Millionaire CEO hired a poor girl for a fake marriage to save his company, but she uncovered his true plans. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main characters. The night Ethan Cole made the proposal was colder than it should have been for early fall, the kind of New York chill that slipped through windows and settled quietly into the bones. Grace Miller stood in the dim hallway outside his penthouse office, her thrift store coat still damp from the rain, her fingers curled tight around the strap of her worn canvas bag. She had no idea why a billionaire CEO wanted to see her, a nobody waitress who worked double shifts and barely slept. But the urgency in his assistant's voice left no room for second thoughts. Inside, the room glowed with warm amber light, and Ethan stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his posture sharp, his expression unreadable against the city skyline. He didn't waste time. "Grace," he said, voice calm but edged with something she couldn't name. "I'm going to ask you for something unconventional." She swallowed, her pulse thudding softly in her ears. "Why me?" Ethan turned, finally meeting her eyes. He was polished in every way, tailored suit, neat hair, a man who looked like he'd never known the word struggle. "Because," he said, "you're clean, private, discreet, and you're in a difficult financial situation. I can solve that." Grace stiffened, embarrassment flushing her cheeks. How did he know? How much did he know? Ethan stepped closer, no threat in his movements, only calculation. "I need a wife. Not forever. Just long enough to stabilize the company and block a hostile takeover. 6 months. She blinked, stunned. "A marriage?" "A contract," he corrected gently. "You'll be compensated generously. Your mother's medical bills, your debts, I'll handle all of it." Grace's breath hitched. He said it so casually, as though saving her entire world was a line item on a spreadsheet. Ethan watched her closely, as if measuring every flicker in her expression. "There will be rules," he added. "Clear ones. This is business, not romance." Grace lowered her gaze to the marble floor, the weight of her reality pressing in. Rent overdue. Hospital payments rising. Double shifts that still weren't enough. And now a stranger, a millionaire, offering her a lifeline wrapped in something that barely felt real. "Why would you trust me?" she whispered. Ethan hesitated for the first time. "Because you have nothing to gain by betraying me, and everything to gain if this works." Her heart pounded harder. His logic was cold, but it wasn't wrong. Still, the idea of standing beside him, pretending to be his wife. "Think about it," Ethan said quietly. "But not for long. Time isn't on my side." Grace exhaled shakily, her world spinning in a direction she never expected. She wasn't prepared. She wasn't ready. But desperation had a way of rewriting the lines between impossible and necessary. And tonight, the line was disappearing fast. Grace Miller barely remembered how she made it down the elevator after Ethan's proposal. By the time she stepped out onto the quiet New York sidewalk, the rain had stopped, but the cold hung in the air like a silent warning. She walked without direction, her thoughts tangled, her breath unsteady. 6 months. A contract. A marriage in name only. The words looped in her mind, each one heavier than the last. She replayed Ethan's voice, calm and certain, as if he were offering her a simple job and not rewriting the course of her life. By the time she reached her small apartment, her fingers were numb and her heartbeat was still unsteady. Ruby, her roommate, sat on the couch folding laundry. She looked up with a familiar mixture of worry and forced optimism. "You look pale," Ruby said. "Did the shift go badly?" Grace opened her mouth, but nothing came. She could not tell her. She had signed non-disclosure paperwork just to enter Ethan's office. Instead, she managed a tight smile. "Just tired." In the bathroom mirror, the fluorescent bulb flickered softly as Grace pulled her hair back. She stared at her reflection, studying the girl with dark circles beneath her eyes. A girl who had been trying for years to outrun bills and bad luck. A girl who was now being asked to step inside a world she did not belong to. She thought of her mother in the small clinic room, the handwritten receipts pinned to the bulletin board, the rising costs that left a dull ache in her chest every time she opened a new envelope. Ethan had mentioned all of it with disturbing accuracy. Someone must have researched her. Someone had handed him her life on a piece of paper, and yet he had looked her in the eye and spoken as if she had a choice. She lay awake long after midnight, listening to the hum of the old heater, counting the seconds between each metallic rattle. Every scenario she imagined had the same ending. Without help, she would lose more than stability. She would lose her mother's treatment. When morning came, the sun was barely up. Grace sat at the small kitchen table with a cup of instant coffee, her hands trembling faintly. She could not escape the truth. Ethan had been right about one thing. Tom was not on her side. She reached for her phone before she could talk herself out of it. Her thumb hovered for a long moment over the unknown number his assistant had given her. One breath, then another. Finally, she pressed call. When Ethan answered, his voice was steady, as if he had been expecting this exact moment. "Grace," he said, "have you made your decision?" Grace closed her eyes, feeling the weight of every consequence pressing down. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely stronger than a breath. "I will do it." For a heartbeat, the line was silent, and she wondered if he had changed his mind. Then Ethan spoke, calm and efficient. "Good. There is a car on the way to bring you in. We will finalize everything today." As the call ended, Grace stared at the phone in her hands, realizing that the life she had known was already slipping away, replaced by something she did not understand and was not sure she could trust. The black sedan arrived exactly when Ethan said it would, idling quietly outside the aging brick apartment building as if it did not belong on a street with cracked pavement and flickering streetlights. Grace stood on the front steps with her canvas bag clutched against her chest, her nerves twisting tighter with every passing second. When the driver stepped out and opened the back door for her, she hesitated before sliding in, feeling the unfamiliar warmth of leather seats beneath her. The city moved past the window in a blur, her pulse keeping time with each turn. She tried to steady her breathing, reminding herself that she had made this choice for a reason, but the closer they drew to cold dynamics, the more her doubts bloomed. The headquarters towered over the district like a glass monolith, its mirrored surface catching the morning sun. Inside, marble floors gleamed and soft lighting washed over gold accents. Employees moved with purpose, dressed sharply, speaking in quick, quiet tones. Grace felt small in her thrift store jeans and worn boots, but the driver gestured for her to follow, and she pushed her shoulders back. Ethan's assistant, a poised woman named Clara, met her at the elevator. "Grace Miller," Clara asked, her voice polite but brisk. "We will begin by reviewing the contract terms. Ethan will join shortly." Grace nodded, though her palms were damp and her throat tight. They entered a conference room furnished with walnut wood and soft cream chairs. On the table lay a stack of documents, neatly arranged, beside a simple velvet box that made Grace's stomach flutter with uncertainty. Clara opened the folder and began outlining the agreement. "The marriage will last 6 months. You will participate in public appearances as needed. You will reside in the Cole penthouse. You will maintain confidentiality at all times." Each clause sounded colder than the last, each signature line tighter than a knot around her chest. When Clara slid the pen toward her, Grace stared at it. A contract for a marriage. A contract for survival. She picked up the pen but paused when the door opened and Ethan stepped in. He looked the same as the night before, composed, unreachable, a man whose world was built on precision. Yet he paused when his eyes landed on her, as if taking in the weight she carried. "If there is anything you do not understand," he said, his tone softer than she expected, "ask before you sign." She almost did. She almost asked why her, why this, why now? But the image of her mother in that small clinic room steadied her hand. She signed. Ethan stepped forward, opening the velvet box. Inside lay a simple band of white gold. "For appearances," he said. When he placed it in her palm, it felt colder than the contract itself. Clara handed Grace a keycard next, embossed with the Cole crest. "This grants entry to the penthouse level. A driver will take you there after your fitting." "Fitting," Grace echoed. "You will need attire that reflects your new role," Clara replied. Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks, but before she could speak, Ethan said gently, "It is procedure. Nothing more." The words were meant to soothe, but they only made her more aware of how wide the gap between their worlds truly was. As she followed Clara out of the room, the ring cool against her skin and the keycard heavy in her pocket, she realized the contract was no longer an idea. It was real, and she was now stepping into a life that no amount of preparation could have made her ready for. The fitting happened in a private studio on the upper floor of Cole Dynamics, a place where soft white lighting glowed across polished mirrors and rows of designer gowns hung like quiet clouds. Grace stood in the center, unsure what to do with her hands as a stylist circled her with gentle precision. She felt exposed, not because of the dresses, but because every inch of this world reminded her she did not belong to it. As fabrics brushed against her skin, she kept thinking about the signature on that contract and the ring now resting inside her pocket. When the stylist stepped back to admire the final choice, Grace stared at her reflection. The gown was simple and elegant, a soft ivory that rested gently along her frame. It made her look like someone she had never met, someone polished, someone who belonged in photographs and headlines. She barely recognized herself. Clara reappeared at the doorway, clipboard in hand. "The ceremony is scheduled for this afternoon," she said. "It will be brief. No guests." Grace nodded, her throat tight. It was exactly what she expected, but hearing it aloud made her chest ache in an unexpected way. A wedding without witnesses. A wedding without joy. Just signatures, flashbulbs, and a narrative crafted for the public. When the car pulled up to the small private courthouse, the sky was a muted blue, as if the day itself were unsure how to feel. Ethan was already there, waiting in a fitted dark suit, his posture composed, his expression unreadable. But when he saw Grace step out of the car, something in his eyes flickered, surprise, maybe, or simply the acknowledgement that she looked different from the girl who had walked into his office the night before. "You look appropriate," he said, and though the words were plain, his voice held the faintest warmth. Grace managed a soft, "Thank you." Inside, the ceremony room was quiet, with polished wood floors and a single official standing behind a desk. No flowers, no music, no vows crafted from love or history, just paperwork and the weight of necessity. As they stood side by side, Ethan's presence felt steady, almost grounding. The official read through the standard lines, and each word echoed in the empty room like a reminder of what this was not. When Ethan slid the ring onto her finger, his touch was careful, almost gentle, as if he sensed how fragile she felt beneath the gown and the practiced calm. Grace lifted her hand to repeat the gesture, placing the plain band onto his finger. For a moment, their eyes met, and the world stilled just enough for her to feel the strange reality settling into her bones. She was now married to a man she barely knew. The official signed the documents, stamped them, and handed the newly printed certificate across the table. "Congratulations," he said, though the word hung awkwardly in the air. Ethan accepted the papers, glanced at Grace, and offered a small nod. "It is done," he said quietly. As they walked back toward the waiting car, the city noise rising around them, Grace felt a subtle shift beneath the certainty in his voice. The contract was sealed, the roles assigned, the timeline set. Yet as she glanced at the ring now resting on her hand, she could not shake the feeling that some part of her life had just closed a door she would never step back through. The drive to the Cole penthouse was quiet, the kind of quiet that settled between two people who had just stepped into a life neither fully understood. Grace watched the city blur past the windows, her fingers brushing the wedding band she still was not used to wearing. Every time the metal caught the light, her stomach tightened. She reminded herself this was temporary, a structured agreement, nothing more. Yet the car's gentle hum and Ethan's calm presence beside her made it strangely difficult to keep her thoughts organized. When they arrived, the building rose so high it disappeared into the afternoon haze. Inside, the penthouse elevator opened into a wide foyer washed in soft light, with pale stone floors and tall windows framing the skyline. Grace stepped inside slowly, feeling the size of the space press against her senses. She had never lived anywhere with more than 2 rooms, and now the ceilings alone felt taller than her entire apartment. Ethan watched her take it all in, his expression unreadable. "You will have access to every room except my office," he said, his tone even. "The staff will come twice a week. They will not intrude otherwise." Grace nodded, unsure how she was supposed to exist in a place that looked like it had been lifted from a magazine. She touched the back of a velvet sofa lightly, almost afraid it might be too delicate. "If there is anything you need," Ethan added, "tell Clara or me." She hesitated before replying. "I will try not to be a burden." Something flickered across his face at that, a reaction too quick to catch fully. "You are not a burden," he said quietly. Before she could process the unexpected softness, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen, his expression tightening. "I have a meeting in 20 minutes. Make yourself comfortable. Dinner will be arranged for later." Grace watched him leave through the hallway, the sound of his measured steps fading into silence. When the door closed behind him, the penthouse felt even larger, its polished surfaces reflecting her uncertainty back at her. She wandered slowly, touching nothing, simply trying to understand the life she had stepped into. The living room overlooked the Hudson River, the afternoon light turning the water a muted gold. A row of bookshelves lined one wall, filled with novels and business texts. The kitchen gleamed with stainless steel and marble, looking more like a showroom than a place where meals were cooked. Eventually, she found a guest bedroom prepared for her, the sheets crisp and the scent faintly lavender. She set her canvas bag on the dresser and sat on the edge of the bed, exhaling a long breath she did not realize she had been holding. This was her home now. For 6 months. A structured arrangement, defined by rules and distance. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a quiet question lingered. One she tried not to hear too clearly. What would happen when two separate lives were forced to share the same space, day after day, pretending to be something the contract insisted they were not? As evening light slipped across the room, Grace realized that the hardest part of this arrangement might not be the rules. It might be learning how to exist beside Ethan without losing herself. The first gala came only 3 days after Grace moved into the penthouse, arriving faster than she could prepare for. Clara handed her a formal invitation that morning, along with a calm reminder that public appearances were essential for presenting a stable marriage image. Grace spent the afternoon in the closet that seemed larger than her entire apartment, choosing a gown recommended by the stylist. It was midnight blue, soft and understated, the kind of dress that seemed to whisper rather than shout. When Ethan returned from meetings, he paused in the hallway as he saw her adjusting an earring in the mirror. His expression did not shift dramatically, but the hesitation in his step was unmistakable. "You look appropriate," he said again, but there was more warmth this time, as if he was fighting not to reveal it too clearly. She offered a small smile, unsure how to respond. The car ride to the event was quiet, the kind of silence filled with unspoken expectations. Grace watched the city roll by, remembering the rules she had signed. Remain poised, maintain the narrative, stay close to Ethan's side. When they stepped out onto the carpeted entrance, camera flashes greeted them like bursts of lightning. Grace stiffened, but Ethan leaned slightly toward her, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "Just walk with me. Focus on the lights, not the people behind them." She nodded, surprising herself with how steady her steps became once she matched his pace. Inside, the ballroom glowed with chandeliers and soft music. Business leaders, investors, and politicians mingled in groups, each conversation polished and calculated. Grace felt eyes on her, questioning, measuring, trying to understand who she was and why Ethan Cole had chosen her. She stayed close, remembering every detail Clara had coached her on. Ethan introduced her only when needed, and although his voice remained composed, Grace caught the subtle shift whenever someone looked at her with too much curiosity. It was during one of these introductions that Nathan Pierce approached, holding a glass of sparkling water, his smile sharp in a way that made Grace's shoulders tense. "So this is the new Mrs. Cole," Nathan said, studying her with an interest that felt more like evaluation. Ethan certainly made an unexpected choice. Grace felt her pulse quicken, but before she could respond, Ethan's hand settled lightly at her back, not possessive, simply steady. "Grace has exceeded expectations already," Ethan said, his tone firm. "And she belongs here." Nathan's eyebrows rose with a hint of amusement before he shifted the conversation to business matters. Yet Grace felt the undercurrent in his words, a warning disguised as politeness. As the evening continued, Grace found herself answering small questions, smiling when she needed to. and keeping her posture composed even when uncertainty lingered beneath her calm exterior. But the moment that stayed with her came later, when she stumbled over a comment about stock projections, something she had never imagined discussing in her life. Before embarrassment could settle in, Ethan smoothly redirected the conversation, covering the slip without drawing attention. When the guest drifted away, Ethan leaned down slightly. "You handled yourself well." She looked up, surprised by the softness in his voice. "I just followed your lead." A hint of a smile touched his mouth. "Then you did exactly what you needed to." As they left the ballroom, the cool night air met them on the steps. For the first time since the arrangement began, Grace sensed something shifting, something fragile, something quiet, an understanding forming between two people who were supposed to be nothing more than a contract. In the days after the gala, something subtle shifted in the rhythm of the penthouse. Grace noticed it first in the small moments, like when Ethan paused before heading to his office, as if he wanted to say something but chose silence instead, or when he returned home a little earlier than usual, claiming the meetings had ended ahead of schedule. She did not question it, but the air around them felt different, less like two strangers occupying separate worlds, and more like two people learning how to exist in the same one. One evening, rain whispered against the tall windows, soft and steady. Grace was in the kitchen, trying to figure out the complicated coffee machine that looked more like a spaceship console than something designed to brew a simple drink. She pressed a button, then another, and a loud whirring sound made her jump back. "It has a manual," Ethan said from behind her, his voice carrying a quiet amusement. She turned, startled. "I did not hear you come in." "You were very focused," he said, stepping past her to tap a sequence of buttons with ease. "This machine is more dramatic than it needs to be." Grace laughed softly, and the sound surprised them both. Ethan handed her the cup, and instead of walking away like he usually did, he leaned against the counter, studying her with an expression she could not quite read. "You handled yourself well at the gala," he said. "Most people in that room would have cracked under the pressure." Grace lowered her gaze to the cup, the steam warming her hands. "I was terrified," she admitted. "But you made it easier." That drew a quieter shift in Ethan's expression, something like understanding mixed with a hint of regret. "I should have prepared you better," he said. "This arrangement asked too much of you too quickly." She shook her head. "I knew what I agreed to. I just hope I am not making things harder for you." Ethan's eyes softened. "You are not." The words hung between them, neither heavy nor light, just honest. As the rain continued tapping against the glass, Ethan gestured toward the living room. "Walk with me." Grace hesitated, then nodded. They moved through the open space, the city lights glowing beneath them. Ethan stopped near the window, hands in his pockets, posture slightly less guarded than usual. "When I was younger," he began, his voice lower than before, "I thought success meant control. The more I built, the less anyone could take from me." Grace listened quietly, sensing this was a part of him he rarely revealed. "But over time," he continued, "control became isolation. You cannot trust people who see you as an asset." She could hear the truth beneath the words, the loneliness he spoke around, but not through. "Is that why you chose a contract?" she asked gently. Ethan looked at the city, not at her. "It was the only way to guarantee honesty. No hidden motives. No expectations I could not meet." Grace absorbed that, the puzzle pieces shifting in her mind. He had built walls not out of pride, but out of old wounds. "And yet," she said softly, "you are still human. You still feel things." He finally turned to her, his expression open in a way she had never seen before. "That is what concerns me." Grace's breath caught, a quiet flutter rising inside her. The contract had rules, firm ones. But in that moment it became clear that rules could not protect them from the one thing neither had planned for: the possibility of something real stirring beneath all the pretense. The days that followed unfolded with a strange mix of calm routine and quiet tension, as if the penthouse itself sensed that the fragile understanding between them was beginning to shift. But the world outside their sanctuary did not rest, and soon the consequences of their arrangement began to creep in. It started subtly. A hushed conversation that stopped the moment Grace stepped into a hallway at Cole Dynamics. A pair of employees exchanging glances as she passed. Clara growing unusually protective of meeting schedules. Grace noticed each moment even if she pretended not to. She had survived too many years of uncertainty not to recognize when people were whispering behind her back. One morning, while Ethan prepared for an investor briefing, she overheard two board members discussing something near the conference room. They did not see her standing by the doorway. "He married her out of nowhere," one said. "It is obviously strategic. Pierce thinks she is the weak link. If that is true, the board will push back hard," the other replied. A personal disruption could destabilize everything. The words pulsed through her chest long after they walked away. Weak link. Disruption. She returned to the penthouse earlier than planned, her thoughts tangled with doubt. She had known from the start that this marriage was built for appearance, but she had not realized how deeply the company relied on Ethan's every public decision. And now she was part of those decisions. When Ethan arrived home that evening, he noticed immediately. "You are quiet," he said as he set his briefcase down. "Did something happen?" Grace hesitated, torn between honesty and the fear of causing more problems. "People are talking," she finally whispered. "About us. About me. They think I will hurt your position." Ethan's jaw tightened, not with anger toward her, but with an irritation aimed at forces she could not see. "You have done nothing wrong," he said. "What they assume is their own limitation." But she shook her head. "I heard someone say, I am your weak link." The silence that followed felt heavy enough to bend the air between them. Ethan stepped closer, his expression no longer guarded. "Grace, listen to me. You are not my weakness. The people who fear what they do not understand are." She wanted to believe him, yet the uncertainty clung to her ribs like a weight. Before she could respond, the elevator chimed. Nathan Pierce stepped out without waiting for permission, his presence filling the room with a cold confidence that set Grace on edge. "Ethan," Nathan said with a practiced smile, "I had hoped to catch you before morning. There are concerns circulating about transparency." His gaze flicked to Grace, lingering just long enough to make his intentions unmistakable. "Some are questioning whether this marriage was authentic." Ethan's posture stiffened, but Nathan continued before he could speak. "The board expects stability. If anything threatens that, they will intervene." Grace felt the message behind the words, a warning wrapped in politeness. After Nathan left, the room stayed quiet for a long time. Ethan looked at her with a certainty she could not match. "Do not let him get into your head," he said. "He wants you to doubt yourself." Grace nodded, but deep inside a new fear began to settle, quiet but persistent. If she became the target of the board's suspicion, what would happen to Ethan's company? And what would happen to their fragile, growing understanding if she was blamed for jeopardizing everything he had built? The weight of Nathan's warning settled into Grace's mind long after he disappeared behind the elevator doors. That night, she lay awake in the quiet penthouse, the distant hum of the city fading beneath the louder sound of her own doubts. Every whispered conversation she had overheard, every curious stare at the gala, every subtle shift in the air at Coal Dynamics now replayed with painful clarity. By morning, she felt as if she were walking on a floor made of thin glass. Ethan left early for meetings, leaving behind a gentle reminder for her to rest. But rest was impossible when her presence seemed to be causing fractures she could not see. Grace tried to push through the unease by focusing on simple routines. She folded laundry, watered the small plant in the corner of the living space, and attempted to make breakfast with the overly complicated stove. Yet her thoughts drifted back to the board members' voices, Nathan's calculated insinuations, and the fear that she might become the reason Ethan's company slipped from his hands. That afternoon, Clara stopped by the penthouse with a stack of curated schedules for upcoming appearances. Her tone was polite, but Grace sensed something new in her hesitation. "There has been some discussion," Clara said carefully, "about managing public perception more intentionally." Grace's chest tightened. "Does that mean they think I am hurting Ethan's position?" Clara pressed her lips together, the answer clear before she spoke. "Not hurting, but the scrutiny is increasing. Some believe the marriage timing leaves room for speculation." Grace thanked her, though her voice wavered. After Clara left, she found herself staring out at the city from the tall windows, the afternoon sun bright against the skyline. The world outside did not know the truth of her life, and the world inside these walls knew only fragments. She had stepped into this arrangement believing she could handle the pressure, believing she could be invisible enough not to disrupt anything. But she was not invisible. She was a problem the board wanted to solve, and Nathan was determined to use her presence to weaken Ethan. When Ethan returned home that evening, she tried to greet him with her usual calm, but he noticed the tension immediately. "What happened?" he asked. She hesitated, then spoke quietly. "I think I am making things worse for you. People are questioning everything. Your marriage, your judgment, your stability." Ethan's expression darkened with concern, not at her, but at the situation surrounding her. "Grace, I told you, none of this is your fault." "But I am the variable," she insisted, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. "Before I came here, your company was already under pressure. Now they are looking for anything to use against you, and I handed them what they needed." He stepped closer, softening his tone. "We will get through this. Together." She wanted to believe him, but the doubt had settled too deeply. Later that night, long after Ethan had retreated to his office, Grace sat alone at the kitchen island, turning the wedding ring slowly on her finger. 6 months had seemed manageable when everything was theoretical. But now every hallway whisper, every suspicious glance, every strategic move by Nathan painted the truth more clearly. She was not just part of a contract. She had become the battlefield on which other people were fighting, and the guilt pressed into her like a quiet, unbearable weight. For the first time since signing the agreement, she wondered if staying might do more harm than leaving. The thought of leaving did not appear all at once. It crept in quietly, forming itself from every uneasy glance, every whispered comment. Every moment Grace felt the weight of Ethan's world pressing where she did not belong. By the end of the week, the doubt had grown sharp enough that she could no longer ignore it. That morning, while Ethan was in back-to-back strategy meetings, Grace sat at the dining table with a cup of untouched coffee, staring at the wedding band glinting faintly in the sunlight. The metal felt heavier than it should, as if it carried the expectations of everyone watching their marriage unfold through a magnifying lens. She remembered Ethan saying they would get through it together, but the truth haunted her. She was the only part of his life that could be removed without destroying the company. And if stepping out of the picture could protect him, was it not the right thing to do? By afternoon, the pressure became too much to sit with. She made her way to Coal Dynamics, hoping to speak with Ethan privately. Instead, she stepped into a conversation she was never meant to hear. Nathan and 2 board members stood near the glass conference wall. They did not see her approach. "The public doubts the marriage," one board member said. "If the numbers dip again, investors will expect a complete restructuring." Nathan folded his arms. "We need leverage. If Grace leaves or makes a misstep, we can claim instability at the top and intervene." The second board member sighed. "If she is the issue, removing her would steady the narrative." Grace froze, the words striking harder than she expected. Removing her. Steady the narrative. Fix the problem by erasing the person. She backed away before they noticed, her heart pounding. She did not know whether Ethan was aware of this plot, but she knew one thing with absolute clarity. Her presence was a threat they were sharpening. When she returned to the penthouse, she packed slowly, carefully folding the few belongings she had brought with her. She left the jewelry and designer clothes Clara had arranged, taking only what belonged to the person she had been before stepping into this world. As she zipped her bag, the elevator chimed. Ethan entered, loosening his tie, exhausted from the day, but the moment he saw the suitcase at her feet, his expression changed. "Grace," he said, breath catching in his chest, "what are you doing?" She tried to hold steady, but her voice wavered. "Ethan, I heard the board. I am putting your company at risk. If I leave, they will stop targeting you." He stepped closer, disbelief tightening his features. "You cannot believe that leaving will solve anything. They said I am the weakness they can exploit," she whispered. "If I stay, they will use me to hurt you." "Grace," he said gently but with an urgency she had never heard from him, "you are not their weapon. They are using fear to control you." She shook her head, unable to meet his eyes. "I never wanted to make your life harder. You deserve better than a wife people see as a liability." The silence that followed was thick, the kind that shifts everything between 2 people. She reached for her bag, forcing herself to breathe. "I need to go," she whispered. Ethan looked at her as if something inside him was cracking, but he did not stop her. He only said one quiet truth, a truth she carried with her long after the elevator doors closed. "Grace, you were never the mistake in this arrangement." And for the first time since the contract began, She wondered if the line between pretense and something real had already started to blur long before she realized it. Grace had expected that walking away from the penthouse would bring relief, but the moment the elevator doors closed, a hollow ache opened in her chest. She checked into a modest hotel on the west side of the city, the kind with thin walls and humming air conditioners, a place that felt closer to the life she had known before Ethan. She told herself she needed clarity, distance, and space to stop the storm she believed she had caused. Yet every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ethan standing in the doorway, the quiet hurt in his expression when she said she needed to leave. Morning came with a soft gray sky and the familiar weight of responsibility pressing against her ribs. She brewed weak coffee in the room's small machine and stared out at the city that seemed far too big for someone like her to change. She tried calling her mother, but the clinic receptionist explained gently that her mother was resting. Grace promised she would visit soon, though she did not mention where she was or what she had done. Later, she found herself walking through the lobby of the clinic, carrying a small bag of groceries she had picked up along the way. The nurse recognized her and smiled warmly. "Your mother has been asking about you. She worries when you disappear." Grace nodded, guilt tightening in her throat. When she stepped into her mother's room, the familiar scent of antiseptic and lavender filled her lungs. Her mother sat propped against the pillows, pale but smiling the way she always did when Grace entered. "You look tired," her mother said softly. "Are you eating enough?" Grace laughed quietly, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I am trying." She sat in the chair beside the bed, holding her mother's hand. For a moment, the world outside felt irrelevant. But her mother studied her closely, reading the truth the way only a parent could. "Something is on your mind. Do not hide it from me." Grace took a slow breath. "I think I made a mistake. I agreed to something to help us, but now it feels like I am hurting someone instead." Her mother squeezed her hand gently. "You have always carried more than your share. But you must remember that running away from a difficult place does not always solve the difficulty." The words landed deeper than Grace expected. After leaving the clinic, she walked for nearly an hour, letting the cool air steady her thoughts. She had been so focused on protecting Ethan's company that she had not stopped to consider whether he wanted her protection in the first place, or whether leaving had hurt him more than staying ever could have. As she reached a quiet park bench overlooking the river, her phone buzzed with a message from Clara. "There is a board meeting tomorrow. Things are escalating. Ethan will not say it, but he needs support." Grace stared at the words, her heartbeat quickening. She had left to keep from being a weakness, yet now the consequences of her absence were rippling through the company. She looked out over the water, its surface shimmering under the afternoon light, and felt something inside her shift, not guilt, but resolve. If she had stepped into this arrangement believing she could handle the burden, then she owed it to herself and to Ethan not to run when it became heavy. For the first time since signing the contract, she realized she was not just reacting to the world around her. She was making a choice, and that choice might lead her back to the place she had been so afraid of calling home. Grace arrived at Cole Dynamics the next morning with her heart pounding, not from fear this time, but from determination. The lobby buzzed with tense energy, employees whispering in small clusters, their glances darting toward the elevators. Something was already happening. She took a steady breath and stepped inside the elevator, watching the numbers climb until they reached the executive floor. When the doors opened, she heard voices coming from the boardroom, sharp, layered, urgent. The meeting had begun. Through the glass wall she saw Ethan standing at the head of the table, shoulders squared, expression composed but shadowed by exhaustion. Nathan stood across from him, gesturing with manufactured concern as he addressed the board. "The instability caused by this sudden marriage has damaged investor confidence. If we continue like this, the company may face irreversible consequences." A murmur of agreement traveled through the room. Ethan's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, a board member added, "It would be in the company's best interest to dissolve the narrative causing the unrest." Grace understood exactly what they meant. She also understood how wrong she had been to think leaving would protect Ethan. Instead, she had given Nathan the leverage he wanted. Without hesitating, she pushed the boardroom doors open. The room fell silent. Dozens of eyes turned toward her, some surprised, some disapproving, and one pair filled with something she could only describe as stunned relief. Ethan stepped forward slightly, as if torn between stopping her and drawing her closer. But Grace held her ground. "If you are going to discuss me," she said softly, "I should be here to hear it." Nathan recovered first, offering a polite smile that did not reach his eyes. "Mrs. Cole, this is a confidential meeting." "Then I will be brief," she replied, lifting her chin. "I did not marry Ethan for attention, nor for money, nor for any of the reasons people have been speculating. I agreed because I believed in what this company stands for, and because I believed I could support him. When I realized my presence might be hurting him, I left. But that was my mistake. I let fear make the decision for me." A quiet ripple moved through the room. Grace continued, her voice steady even as her hands trembled slightly at her sides. "If you want stability, then you deserve the truth. Ethan did not force me into anything, and he certainly did not manipulate the board. The only instability here has come from assumptions and rumors." Nathan opened his mouth to counter, but Grace spoke again, more firmly. "You are looking at me as if I am the problem. But the problem is not that Ethan married me. It is that some of you believe a woman like me does not belong beside him." The silence that followed was sharper than any argument. Slowly, she turned toward Ethan. His eyes held hers, a mix of gratitude and something deeper, something neither of them had dared to acknowledge. She stepped closer, reached into her bag, and pulled out the folded contract. "This was meant to define our arrangement," she said quietly. "But it does not define who we are." Without breaking eye contact, she set the contract on the table between them. Ethan seemed to understand instantly. He took the lighter from his pocket, placed it beside the papers, and looked at her as if asking a question without words. Grace gave the smallest nod. Ethan ignited the corner of the document, and the flame curled through the pages, glowing bright before fading into ash inside the metal tray. A symbolic ending, a beginning they had not planned for. When the last ember dimmed, Ethan turned to the board. "This marriage is not a liability, and neither is she." Grace stood beside him, no longer as part of a contract, but as someone who had chosen to stay. And for the first time, the boardroom, the place that once felt like the center of all her fears, felt like the place where everything had finally shifted into truth. In the weeks that followed, the atmosphere around Cole Dynamics shifted in a way no one had anticipated. The tension that once clung to every hallway eased, and for the first time in months, Ethan led meetings without the shadow of suspicion trailing behind him. The board, tempered by the moment they had witnessed, seemed to reassess not only their assumptions but their respect for him. And for Grace, life no longer felt like a temporary performance. It felt like a life she was finally allowed to live. One mild spring afternoon, Ethan invited her to visit a project he had been quietly developing for years, a community initiative aimed at supporting young entrepreneurs who came from backgrounds like hers. As they walked through the sunlit space, newly renovated and filled with the bright buzz of preparation, Ethan watched her with a softness that no longer flickered and vanished, but remained steady. "You inspired this expansion," he said. Grace looked at him, surprised. "Me? How?" "Because you reminded me of something I had forgotten," he replied. "People do not need to fit a mold to matter. They just need someone to believe in them." She felt warmth bloom in her chest, deeper and steadier than before. They toured the space for another hour before returning to the penthouse, where the late afternoon light painted everything in gold. Grace stood by the window, watching the river shimmer far below. She did not hear Ethan approach until he was beside her. "Grace," he said softly, and she turned to find him holding a small velvet box. Her breath caught. This time there was no contract, no board pressure, no pretense. Only a man standing in front of her with his heart completely unguarded. "When we began this, I asked for a partner in a deal," he said gently. "But somewhere along the way, I found myself wanting something real, something I did not think I would ever deserve." He opened the box, revealing a delicate ring that sparkled softly in the sunlight. "This is not about obligation. It is not about expectation. It is not about saving anything." His voice grew quieter, steadier. "It is simply about choosing you. If you want me, not the company, not the stability, not the arrangement, just me." Grace felt her throat tighten, emotion rising like a tide she could not hold back. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I stayed because I wanted you to know that you were never alone." "Not really." Ethan stepped closer, close enough for her to see every unspoken hope reflected in his eyes. "Grace Miller," he said, Will you stay with me for a life that has no contracts? Her answer came with a breath she had been holding since the day she met him. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times yes. He slid the ring onto her finger, and for the first time it felt like something that belonged to her. No paperwork. No expectations. Just choice. Later, as they stood in the warm glow of the living room, Ethan picked up the old penthouse keycard he had once given her. Keep this, he said softly. Not because you need it, but because this home is yours now. Not by contract, by choice. Grace leaned into him, her heart steady and full. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by the soft hum of the city and the golden light of a new beginning, they stepped into a future built not on strategy or necessity, but on something truer, something earned, something real.